Okay, now this is going to be a very special episode of Shining Time Station. First of all, this is the Season 2 premiere. Second of all, this is a very special episode in the traditional sense. And that is because... It's a Halloween episode! And third of all, this episode makes changes to the show that I think are gonna be a little iffy. Season 2, Episode 1, Scare Dare, is notable for many different things. The first one is that this is the show's first official Halloween episode, even though it aired in November. Fuck! The other massive addition to this episode are all these sudden status quo changes that are delivered in the first minute of the episode. Matt and Tanya are writing to their cousins. They basically just deliver the ending of the Christmas special, where Mr. Nicholas goes back to his workshop in the North Pole, but unknown to us at the time, Mr. Conductor went with him to help. And so now Mr. Conductor's cousin, played by George Carlin, is now attending Shining Time Station instead. This was something that was unknown to me until watching this episode, because I had always assumed that all the Mr. Conductors, Ringo Starr, George Carlin, and eventually Alec Baldwin, were all just the same person. But no. Apparently, according to this episode, each Mr. Conductor are different cousins. So Ringo Starr is his own character, and George Carlin is his own character, and eventually Alec Baldwin will be his own character. They're just all called Mr. Conductor because why the fuck not? So yeah, Halloween episode, we are introduced to Tanya's cousin Carol, who wants to be an engineer, just like their grandfather Harry. Which is weird, because Harry is not in this episode. Stacy wonders where Matt's cousin Dan is, but I don't know, and then they leave. And then Dan shows up. Stacy asks where his costume is, and he replies,
I haven't got one yet, Aunt Stacy.
where the fuck are these kids' parents? Like, I know that's a weird thing to ask in a kids show. You're not really supposed to ask these types of questions. Like, oh, why is everything in Pee-wee's Playhouse alive? Like, you're not supposed to ask these types of questions, you know? You're not supposed to know why the puppets in Sesame Street don't age, or how Barney gets his powers. Like, you're not supposed to ask these types of questions, but it's usually with the magical shit. I'm asking questions about the normal shit, like, where are these kids' fucking parents? Because every time we see them, Matt's always with his aunt, and Tiny's always with his grandpa. Where are their parents? I don't know if they're even mentioned throughout the entirety of the episodes that we've seen. And my initial thought is that Matt's cousin was Stacy's son. That was my theory. But no, they're just completely normal. That's also Stacy's nephew with different parents. The show, man. I gotta review 19, 20 more of these. Fuck. Dan tries to find one and ends up in the shop, where he meets Harry's replacement. Dan is terrified of this man for some reason. It's probably a race thing, so he runs off. Meanwhile, Schemer is repainting rotten pumpkins to sell them as new ones, which is the most realistic thing this character has ever done. I'm really trying to throw in realism for the franchise about talking trains, aren't I? Stacy tells him to stop that shit, and Schemer's like, fuck you. We cut to the jukebox band, who don't play a song and are just chatting, so you kind of wonder what the point of this was, other than just filling time. So Mr. Conductor meets Dan and Carol for the first time and hides away. But he then reveals himself after they reveal themselves as Matt and Tanya's cousins. The kids ask him a lot of questions about both him and the island of Sodor. Mr. Conductor answers those questions and then tells them the story of, ooh, Percy's Ghostly Trick, one of my favorites. Later, an old lady notices a banana in Schemer's pumpkin barrel. Schemer says that she can't have the banana, and the two of them get in a little fight. So it turns out that Carol dared Dan to take the banana. Yeah, truly riveting television. Mr. Conductor asks if Dan has found his costume yet, but Dan says that he has no idea what to do. Then Mr. Conductor shows him the Anything Tunnel for the very first time. It's a special Halloween edition of the Anything Tunnel, which features tons of spooky public domain cartoons about how I'm not really scared. Hey, speaking of public domain cartoons, you hear that Mickey Mouse is public domain? I'm recording this in January, can you tell? Dan tells Mr. Conductor that he's afraid that if people know he's afraid, they won't like him.
And I was afraid of you and Kara until I got to know you.
This is literally the second conversation you've ever had with this child. Oh, and apparently her name is Carolyn, not Carol. I've been saying Carol the whole time, but I do not feel like going back through the entire video and redubbing it saying Carolyn, so fuck you. Anyways, Mr. Conductor is a cowboy now, and he tells the story of Percy and the Dragon. What's going on? I'm a dragon!
A dragon, a dragon. I swear I saw a dragon. A green and seething, fire-breathing monster is in sight.
So the rest of the kids dare Dan to go on inside of the machine shop. And so he goes inside of there. But the mere presence of an Indian man frightens him. Whoa, oh my god. Wait. Wait. Just wait. Anyway, he shows Dan some cool tribal shit, and now he's not afraid anymore. Schemer then decides to put on some spooky music on the jukebox, and the band plays a spooky song. But while Schemer is trying to get the quarter inside of the jukebox, the pumpkin on top of it ended up falling straight onto his head. And hey, I remember this episode of Mr. Bean. Also, there was an actual ghost in the jukebox machine. So, you know that Thomas story that they told that said that ghosts weren't real and there was nothing to be afraid of? Well, fuck that noise, because apparently ghosts are very real in this universe. Then again, this is also the same universe that consists of talking trains, sentient puppets that live in a jukebox, a man the size of a thumb who can travel between universes, and Santa Claus. So, are ghosts really that out of the question here? So the kids get back from trick-or-treating, but Dan scares them. But then Schemer scares the kids. But then Mr. Conductor scares Schemer. End of episode. Now, I wanted to do this segment of the video where it's me instead of doing it with voiceover, because I truly feel like this is going to be very important of the episode of the show moving forward. You guys remember the Blue's Clues episode where they introduced the character of Joe? For those of you unfamiliar, Joe was a character from the Nickelodeon preschool series Blue's Clues, who was introduced as Steve's brother. And basically the entire reason the character was introduced is because the character who played Steve, Steve Burns, wanted to leave the series to pursue other projects, which is what he did. They introduced Joe, they had him show up for a few more episodes, and then in Joe's first appearance, Steve revealed to the characters and the audience that he would be leaving for college, and therefore, Steve Burns would be leaving the series. As a kid, I remember this episode being a very emotional moment, knowing that we were never going to see Steve again, and it was very sad. And a lot of kids, including myself, were kind of heartbroken the fact that we weren't going to see Steve again. Now, apparently everyone forgot about the 100th episode where Steve actually did show up briefly, and Steve has made some appearances in the Revival series, like, a couple times, and even showed up in the recent movie, but still, many kids were left destroyed by that episode. And, Joe came along and became the new host for Blue's Clues, and many kids felt like it just wasn't the same. I personally didn't mind Joe. I thought it was a really entertaining host, but something that Steve had is something that couldn't really be replicated because it was 100% his own. And a lot of kids knew Steve. That is not our Steve. This got so bad to the point where for Blue's Clues' 20th anniversary, Steve, in character, had to make a video basically apologizing for leaving the kids. Now, I bet you're all wondering, what the fuck does this have to do with Shining Time Station? Because I truly believe that the episode that we just talked about is going to be the Shining Time Station equivalent to the Steve Goes to College arc. I actually got curious, and I did some research on the characters. And Matt and Tanya do not appear in Season 3, to my knowledge. I think that Dan and Carol are going to replace Matt and Tanya as the main child characters. Similar to how Mr. Conductor George Carlin replaced Ringo Starr, and how that guy replaced Henry. I think that this is going to be the same thing as Joe replacing Steve. And the only two actors and characters that we will have for the series moving forward will be Stacy and Schemer and the Jukebox Band. I don't know how I'm going to feel about this because I'm not a child. I wasn't a child when I watched this show. I mean, I was, but I don't remember shit about it. And I truly do not know how this is going to affect the show moving forward. Will the show remain exactly the same? Or will the general vibes of the series just completely alter with this new cast? Because with Blue's Clues, they did this in Season 4, going into Season 5. We are in the first episode of Season 2, and things are changing fast. You can't fucking do that to a kid. Kids love things that are familiar to them. They love repetition. They love the same shit over and over and over again. This is why we sing the same nursery rhymes to them. This is why many popular kids shows have a very easy to follow formula. This is why the most popular video on YouTube is fucking Baby Shark. But we are just at the first episode of Season 2, and the only way to figure out if this is going to alter the show in any way is if we keep watching. So I'll join you tomorrow for Episode 2.